I'll just tell you a couple of quick things about me related to Waukegan. My wife and I were living in China. We were abroad for 4 years, and I had lived in Rogers Park prior to that. And we were about to move back, and we didn't know where we could. I guess you can hear that. Rogers Park had gentrified. It was a cool neighborhood. And when we were in China, a friend of ours, Debbie from Libertyville, she was a realtor, and she said, "Oh, you got to check out Waukegan." I said, "You know, I never heard a good thing about Waukegan." And I'd lived in Rogers Park for about 15 years in Evanston and all of that. So, you know, we all know the stigma and the sort of perception of Waukegan is that. And she said it's great because it's cheap and it's diverse and it's interesting. And for me as an artist, those were instantly appealing things. And that's part of why I like living in the city. But I didn't know it was such an arts community. As soon as I drove here and saw how beautiful it was, I thought that was cool. But I didn't know what the legacy was here. I didn't know what I was moving into. It just looked like it fit a lot of the right criteria for us, but it carries this stigma. So I think one of the solutions to that stigma is for everybody to start to know that this is a creative town. And I thought it was just starting to be a creative town. And that's what's been wonderful about. We've met a couple of times prior to this, and I have some history with these guys. And I didn't realize the depth of their connection to this community and how deep the arts movement went back. And of course, that gives a great footing to move forward. So we're at this really nice transition point where I think things in general in Waukegan are improving. And we have this, of course, influx of culture artists. And there's a whole community of artists that are here that aren't always known. And so what I would like to share with you guys tonight is how great these individuals are as artists and people, and they really are terrific, and also how they connect to why there is an artistic community in here and how that has managed to maintain itself for such a long time through harder times, I would have to say. I'll start with you, Maggie.
Yes.
First of all, Maggie does have a show at the Undercroft Gallery right now, and just as an artist, you know, Maggie is the sister of my neighbor. And so I have wonderful neighbors, Becky and Quentin Schwartz, and so I sort of am treated like family now. Whenever there's a family thing going on, I'm invited along with my wife and my son. And there's this fascinating lady that's always at these parties, and I'm always sitting next to her because we get along really well, and I know why, because she's just out there, but in a really good way. And she knows it. But you know, and I think I know her as an artist. I've been to her house and I've seen some of her paintings, but it's like so many things. The more time you spend, the more exposure you have. So I went to her show at the Undercroft this week, and I just asked her to meet me there, and we went for probably an hour, I would say. Mm-hmm. And it was just incredible to see the depth of what she's done and the range of things. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not putting something on for the fact that this is a show. She is an excellent painter. She's an excellent three-dimensional artist. She's thinking conceptually, and not just now, but I see pieces. I said, well, when did you make that? She says, 20 years ago. It's like a cloth piece that's on the floor that she did. It's like a carpet, but I want to call it art, because it is art. Right. And she spins her own wool, and she's been recycling material. She really does. I mean, she'll make that thing from scratch. She'll go find some cool leather that's been torn up, and she say, well, that has possibilities. And so she has all these ideas, and they're coming together, and they're really modern, and they're really broad. They're not just sort of Sunday paint. I know that's not a very nice term to use, but it's not narrow. And there's a reason for it. You know, she did go to the Art Institute, as I understand, right? And right. You went to Northern before that. And then you tell them, but at the gallery the other day, she said, but the biggest influence on my life was this...
Sister Thomasita Fessler at Cardinal Stritch College in Milwaukee.
Right. And why her?
Well, she had me break out of the mold. You know, just do whatever. Right.
And you've already been to the Art Institute at this point.
Yes.
And I would have thought they would get you to break out of the mold, but she injected something else.
She was fantastic, right. Mm-hmm.
And what gave her the leggings to be that?
She inherited it, you know, it's a long story.
That's what we're here for.
No, she also went to the Art Institute, and she was a nun teaching at Cardinal Stritch, and the class I took was non-credit for elderly ladies, which we were back in the 80s. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, yeah. And you never know where things are going to come from in your life, right? You try this and you try that. I know Maggie, when she was a young woman, not that she's not young now, she's certainly vital. She and her husband moved into a house in Waukegan, and as it turns out, across the street was the Lake County Art League, as I understand, right?
Right.
And you hadn't expected that.
We were on West Street, and across the street, I found out that the Lake County Art League met above Peterson Plumbing, which was about I lived at 28, so that had to be 29 or 31. And so I inquired about it, and the Lake County Art League is an offspring of the Junior Women's League. And you had, in order to join the Art League, you had to have a sponsor, and you had to submit your work, and if it wasn't accepted, you could keep submitting until you could be an artist member. Otherwise, you were a patron member. And thank goodness for our patron members, because they were members that were not interested in painting, but in supporting the arts. And so, yeah, what else do you want to know?
Well, you would have some parties, as I understand.
Well, yes. We had a dinner at least once a year at the Karcher Hotel. And we exhibited our work at the Karcher Hotel, which had a restaurant on the lower level, and that's where we met, and that's where the exhibits were. Yeah, and it's interesting that now the Karcher is back in the arts.
Yep. So she's been a member with the Art League for 60 years,
60 years.
approximately.
Right.
And when we met recently, Skip was mentioning to me, of course, he's been a member a long time as well. When he arrived in Waukegan, you were 18, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, I graduated high school, and my stepdad worked for Northwestern Railroad, and he was a welder, so he had to be on the track between Chicago and Milwaukee. Well, that commute, he'd get a call in the middle of the night that there was a broken rail or something, maybe up in Zion, and he'd have to drive up and go. Well, this way he was in closer, so we moved up here. And initially, when we came we were driving through the area, trying to find a place to stay, to live, and he took me to Zion, and I just closed my eyes. Now, mind you, I'm an 18-year-old kid in Chicago, and I'm living, and I knew that fast life in Chicago. And I looked at it, we can't, this town pulls up its sidewalks at 5 o'clock. No way. So we ended up deciding that Waukegan was going to be my home. And I was working in Chicago, and so I had a commute. Well, fortunately, Edison Court Station was a block away from the house we had, we rented, and I commuted. And that was the beginning of my commute, which took 29 years to complete. Anyway, the beauty of it was that when I got into the Art League now, the plaza that's on Lewis was just built. And that particular summer, they had the first art show at that plaza. And one of the members asked me to, join the Art League, and I said, well, okay, and you can be in the art show. So my first art show was over at the plaza. So I think that was what, 1957? 56. Does that sound right? 56. Anyways, so I began my beginnings in the Art League there. And then a few years later, working with the various, with Maggie and Liz and Thelma Bobian, and well, I won't go through a bunch of names, but anyway, we, the league had to demo meetings, which were great. And so we had people, artists coming in from all over, and we expanded that. Turned out I became president a couple of times in those early years, as I'm sure Liz was. How many times? How many times were you president?
How many times I what?
Were you president of the Art League? Twice. Well, see, normally it's once, but you were how many?
2 months.
2 months. 2 months. That must have been the.
Well, because then I was pregnant, and I can't do anything when I'm pregnant. I'm very fragile.
Hard to believe.
Well, that's why I thought you. That's how you got pregnant.
Oh,
So that you, so you wouldn't have to be a president. But,
One thing in regards to the Art League, you guys talked about the early days, and I know Phil Austin was an artist who was from around here and a highly accomplished artist. I think he was nationally known. And you both, at least you sort of candidly said to me at the time, they kind of looked at the Art League like it's just barely meets the needs of their quality of what they would want to be a part of. And they said in those days, in their opinion, it was like 5% good artists and 95% not good artists. But there's been a huge shift. And what's happened is, and they were very candid, they said now it's like 95% really good artists and 5% that aren't. So that's a great sign of what's really going on. Then it was a bit of a social club kind of a thing going on, right? There was this sort of double level to it, and so the emphasis wasn't on being, real art. And they were very, very broad-minded because they invited you to put this piece in their show, didn't they, Maggie?
which one?
The nude.
Oh. Who
I'm teasing you.
Oh, okay.
It's a setup.
Get to that.
There's a story behind this painting. They've asked each of them to bring 2 of their paintings, and there's quite a good story behind this painting. So you might as well,
Well,
since we're
when
there.
I first joined the Art League, the first exhibit, I entered a nude. We don't exhibit nudes. So 30 years later, they asked me to do a demonstration. And I thought, let's see, shall I do flowers or fruit or what? Oh, no. I have to do a nude self-portrait because we can't exhibit nudes. So this is my nude self-portrait.
Hot stuff, baby.
yeah, with me, this hallway painting, Liz and I, we had a studio up down on, just about Washington Street here on Genesee. It was up on the second floor. And this hallway was about 20 feet long or something like that. And it was a mess. It had all kinds of junk just piled up in boxes and old plasterboard and pipes and whatnot. And all of a sudden I went, the washroom was right down at the end of this hall. And nature was calling, so I go down to the hall and I'm looking, oh my God, look at this. They cleaned it up. They took all that stuff out, they swept it down. I said, that could make a nice painting because the way the sun comes through the door, the east door, and even though it's been painted and boarded up, sort of, and the light just filtered through. So I took a picture of it and I painted it. And well, I finished the painting and I'm looking at it and I said, there's something missing here. I said, there's no relationship to a human being or something alive. So I didn't have a bird. What I did is I took a piece of paper and I crunched it up and I folded it so that it looked like the shape of a bird, and I just set it on the floor, and I sketched it in, and I put it in, and I said, well, that's it. And it gets its title now from No Escape. There was no way out of there. You couldn't go in, you couldn't go out, because that door was sealed so tight, just couldn't do it. And it was painted there, but I just loved that it got cleaned up, and it was so nice.
Now, that hallway, yeah. And that's the amazing thing about art, right? You know, he even said to me last night, we were chatting about this piece, and he said, you know, I'll probably never sell it because it's a hallway. Who wants a hallway? But artists see things, they see opportunities in places where you just wouldn't think there would be one. And it is a wonderful painting. When I walked in from back there, it works from a distance, it works well up close. This hallway, as I understand it, I think kind of links you two, right? Because Liz, she's a really interesting lady. She's a dynamo, and I don't know her that well, but I know her enough, and from talking to other people, that they say she was and is a spitfire. Anyway, she said to us at our get-together that, you know, art is in people from the very start, and they just sort of know it, and that was clear to her. So she knew she had this artistic bent from a young age, and she wanted to be creative, and she knew that she'd always be creative. So for her, as far as practicality went, it translated to dressmaking, as I understand it, right? So for many, many years, she built garments, some to order and some as pure creative endeavors for ball gowns, etc. She would design them, build them, construct them. I think she even managed a textile place in the city. And so I'll get her to talk about that, but also later on, she remarried a fellow, Everett, right? Everett Misunas. And he was a teacher at the Waukegan High School, an art teacher there for I think 35 years. So this culmination of a life of interest in the art, with them also falling in love and marrying, second marriages for both of them, they opened a space on this hallway, and they called it the
Mousehole Studio.
Mousehole Studio. Tell them a little bit about how that came to be.
Well, it goes back a long way, actually. Everett, of course, was an etcher. We became acquainted through the Lake County Art League, primarily. I think that's when I met Skip. I've known Maggie for years through Christ Episcopal Church.
Right.
But this was a nucleus. But when Everett and I were married, he was an etcher primarily, which meant a big press and all this equipment. He wanted to move into my house. We both had been widowed. My house was full with my own activities, so we went downtown to get a gift. Liz Craig had a beautiful antique and gift shop at 19 North Genesee Street. Went in to get a gift for David, I think it was. Asked Liz what was happening upstairs. She says, absolutely nothing. Why? I said, well, would it be good for a studio? Oh, yeah. She had the key. She said, come on. So up we go. It had been vacant for 50 years. It had been a photograph studio. When my daughter was 9 months old, I had a photograph there because he left, and everything was left in place except the cash register, which was stolen. Anyway, Liz showed us a space, 57 feet long, 18 feet wide, 3 rooms, entry, workspace, studio, dark room, because Everett was also a photographer. Fine, we'll take it. How much? $50 a month. Okay, no problem. It cost $3,000 to bring it into workable condition. Anyway, Everett and I were married. We decided to have our wedding reception there as well as an opening of the studio space. Everybody came. Skip came in, he says, man, this is great. Is there any more space? Yeah, right down the hall.
50 bucks.
That night, he rented 7 spaces to artists, so that was
7 in one night?
7 more
Oh, my goodness.
artists. So that was the beginning of the renaissance, if you will, downtown Waukegan.
Right.
And it worked out very well. We
Now, how
were
did
there
it get the
13
name
years.
Mousehole?
Well, we called it the Mousehole because when we went in, it had been vacant for 50 years, and there was little black things all over the place. Mary says, looks like we got some mice around here. I said, yeah. He says, we call it the Mousehole Studio. So that was it. And for the next 22 years,
Do you
The-
remember the address?
the address,
Address.
19 off Genesee.
Yeah.
19 North Genesee.
If there was the photographer was on the ground floor, and then the
We had a
second,
dentist upstairs
Yeah.
who panicked with all these artists. He retired and left. Jim Yogas was a writer,
yeah,
also Toddy, because he and Everett were buddies. He needed a space to work because he was writing for the News Sun at the time, so he rented the dental office.
and Jackie Schluter had the
Jackie
chil-
Schluter
the
had
children's
classes.
Children's classes.
Peggy Brash came and rented space. We had a nun from St. Bart's who took over a space. We had Ed Conwisher from the College of Lake County who took over a space, so we filled the whole thing with artists.
So you can see how one thing can be a catalyst for so many things, right? There's no reason why the car tour isn't the first thing in town, but it's another good reason to have this catalyst effect here. And when people see other people coming to something like you saw her, it can build up your confidence, right? And there is power in collectivity and in numbers. And so as I understand it, this and then you, and then there was another fellow that had a space that you guys used to show in, right? And you bring 20 or 30 paintings each. It was a really large
Oh,
space.
that was Malcolm Lason's place.
Right.
That was on
Right.
North Avenue. It was a group, we had this group that was called Five to Show. And we showed every year for 25 years. And we would bring basically about 30 paintings each.
Well, it started with Mel Lason.
Yeah, it started with Mel Lason, Ed Canwisher, you
You and
I, and let's see, who was one?
Dan Black.
Oh, yeah, Dan
Dan
Black.
Black was
Dan
involved.
Black. Dan Black was an architect, but he also did some fantastic watercolors. In fact, the bank over on Lewis Avenue, he designed that bank, and then he also had the paintings that were hung in there at the early stages. I don't think they're there anymore, because it went into different hands. They're still there. They're still there? Okay. I don't go in there very often. And basically, that show was not only good for each of us individually, because for a weekend we sold paintings that we would normally not sell all year round. And so it was great because we got not only exposure, got people to come in that were interested in the arts, and I can still picture some of the people walking by the front of the shop and looking and seeing all the activity, and they would come in. Well, there was also free food. So,
And that's why we need to get some gallery stuff going on at the car tour so people have visibility. You know, it'd be great to get those front spaces filled with something that holds art. One thing that I really want you to know about Skip is that, you know, he's, especially for you younger artists, he's an artist who's made his living through his art, right? So in Maggie's situation, she's been absolutely dedicated to the arts. She's never had to rely on the selling of her art to make her living. And Liz did it through her dressmaking, but she was incredibly dedicated, no question about it, is highly accomplished. But you know, there's other criteria when you make your living as an artist. And so Skip he's a part of a generation, you know, there was like a golden age of illustration in America, and I don't want to say it's gone, but you know, the hand-drawn thing in the magazines and all the forms of reproduction, it's kind of been segued by photography largely, and then of course computer-generated images. So back in the days when you were working, they had big studios in the city, and they'd have staffs of 40, 50 artists.
Yep.
And I know you started off as an assistant to an artist.
Well, I was an apprentice. Apprenticeships were, you were a gopher. You came in, the particular studio I worked for, H&R, was a fashion studio. And we did work for, like Carson's and Sears and almost all the stores on State Street. Those were our accounts. We may not have been the only studio doing it, but we had the major portion of it. We had, I think, 35 or so artists, which were called the board artists. These were the ones that actually produced the work, and they did anything from furniture to men's fashion, women's fashion, children's fashion. Well, I came in as an apprentice, and right from high school. And they asked me, well, first off, I met a girl that I went to grammar school with out on the street outside I think it was Madison Street. Anyway, we were stopped and talked, and I was on my way to the Art Institute to register for classes. And she happened to tell me, or I told her what I was planning to do to go to school. And she says, "Can you afford it?" And I says, "Well, I work all summer to pay for the tuition for the fall." And she says, "Well, I work in a studio, and I apprentice. I get paid, and I can do artwork, and I can go to school at nights." She says, "Why don't you try it?" And I said, "That sounds like a good idea." So I said, "But I don't know any studios." So she wrote down a whole bunch of studios for me to go to. Oh, I trekked all to these studios that day because I had my portfolio with me. And I got a typical answer from almost every one of them. "Don't call me, I'll call you." That was long about Wednesday. And so then I happened to stop at the studio that she worked at. And she said to me, "If you go there, don't mention my name." Okay, well, all right. So, okay, I left that alone. So I go over there, and the boss, one of the bosses, he looks at my artwork, and he kept stopping at a couple fashion drawings that I had copied from a magazine. And then he moved on, and then nothing more. And then he says, "Well, I'll get in touch with you." And I says, "Fine." Well, the next day he calls me, and he says, "Would you like that job as an apprentice?" And I says, "Oh, God, yes." And he says, "When can you start?" "When you want me." And he says, well, how about Monday?" I said, "I'll be there." Well, I came in at like 9 o'clock in the morning. I figured, everything they should be humming right about that time. Nobody came in until after 10. And I said, "Ooh, this is a nice job." So anyways, I apprenticed, and apprenticeship generally lasted 2 years. Now, mind you, my salary was $25 a week, and all the materials I could draw on. They furnished all the paper, the boards, the ink, pens, not brushes. Brushes you had to buy. And so that gave me my beginning. And after I met everybody in the studio, you could go and ask any of them, well, how do you do this, or how do you do that? And they would show you, or they'd be working on something, and he says, "Oh, come here, look at, this is the way you do this." And I got a background. And so when I did some sample drawings, and I would take them to one of the guys, one particular guy, Hal Katora, was a male men's fashion illustrator. And I'd ask Hal, what do you think of these? And the thing that they said to me, which surprised me, here I'm thinking, he's going to check over my drawing. He says, you got good contrast. And I didn't quite know what that meant. And then he says, we're newspaper advertisers. We have to draw for the newspaper. The newspaper, the printing is very crude by by the standard. There's so many lines per square inch, and that they can use, and it just, the things were, if it was too weak, it would fade out and you wouldn't see it. So if you had good contrast, your art was noticed, and this is what the advertisers want. So I did that, and like I said, for 29 years. But I went to the Art Institute at night, and one of the guys I worked with who was a board artist, he and I used to go to classes together. We'd take painting classes, we'd take life drawing classes, and this was all at nights and on Saturdays, and that was my background. I don't have a degree, I don't have all the sheepskins that go with colleges and that, but I got a good training with right in an art studio.
And I think that's the challenge as an artist, is trying to find the balance. For me as an artist, I got out of art school, and every artist generation is slightly different as to how they're going to make their living. For example, a couple of years ago, I was in Chiang Mai, Thailand, working away, and this really cool guy from Spain walks up to me and he says, "You mind if I sit and paint next to you?" I said, "Bring it on, brother." So we hung out for like 4 days, and he makes his living creating characters for video games, and he gets hired to go to London for 4 months, and all he has to do is think of characters and draw them up. Now that would have been something that would have been an option for me coming out of art school, but that's where it might be now, right? So every artist has to find their way, but as long as you know that you want to be creative, then you just make sure that happens. You find the niche, and that's what I was asking Skip earlier. Is you got your day job, which for him is making art. It's commercial art, but it is art. How did you keep the fine art side of yourself alive? There's another artist that we all have in common. I mentioned him earlier. His name was Phil Austin. And they said Phil was highly accomplished. He was really a great artist, but he never changed his style for all those years. He never tried anything else, and so maybe art for him was just a vehicle to make a living, or maybe he just saw that he didn't think he had room for that. But how do you keep growing as an artist with all the sort of demands of everyday life? And that is the challenge. And so for me, coming to Waukegan, of course, like I said earlier, it wasn't so expensive, and you have to find this way. And you said that over the years, you guys always have life drawing classes, or life drawing groups, right? They'd have nude models in the early days, and they'd pick somebody's house, or you'd go to a space.
Well, there were
Give me one
quite a
second and
few
I'll
of us. We would get a model from Chicago, and she rode the train out here, and someone picked her up, and we met in Odell Jewelry Store basement. And she would pose nude for us, and we would split the fees, and this went on for quite some time, and then they moved into my basement. But it was fun.
And that's what's going on in the Dandelion Gallery now, right? They're doing, on a Tuesday night or whatever night that they're picking, they're saying, let's get together, split the fees on the model, and make it happen. You were going to say something
I
else.
was going to say, you mentioned Phil Austin a couple of times. He had his one-man shows at the Kacha Hotel in the mezzanine for years. Right? But he also was a commercial artist downtown Chicago, which is how he paid the freight. Of course, his wife had to work too, but eventually he could give that up and then depend on his art. But he had to hit all the shows all over the country just to make a living,
Sure.
which is a tough go.
It's a tough go.
It's a tough go.
No question about
Which
it.
is why I was a dressmaker, because I knew I could make money as a dressmaker, not necessarily with the art.
Yeah.
But the Art League, it has to be mentioned, was established in 1939, and we, being members, and other people have been members all these years. It is the entree into the exhibit so that you can show your work. We used to have the Festival of Art twice a year, spring and fall, where you could exhibit the work wherever. In fact, we had an exhibit at Lewis Plaza. That's the first time I saw Tom Kapheim's work. He had a sculpture there of a head. I thought, man, that's great.
Yep.
Because he had to be a teacher in order to make a living.
Well, you know, that's just it, you know, the different ways you make money. When I think back, I've done medical illustrations for the Med Center here in North Chicago.
Abbott.
No, it wasn't Abbott, no, this was, what is it, it's in back of Franklin, Rosalind Franklin.
Oh,
VA hospital?
No, it wasn't the VA,
Oh, the VA.
but it was, this was, the doctor was Dr. Schumer, and he was a oncologist, and so it was cancer. And so I did some medical illustrations for him. And I got that through Malcolm. Malcolm was doing it before me, and Malcolm had some health problems and went up to Canada to be operated on, and he asked me if I would do it, so I ended up doing that. I did cartoons for the Navy. I did, like you heard, I did 2 murals. So each one of these is a different phase, and you have to be able to do different things in different ways, because I did set designs. The very first one that I did was Brigadoon, and that was the first time that the, what was it, the Philharmonic or something in town here, and community players got together and made one. They worked together for a show, and I became the set designer for that. And the comment that was in the paper was that the Philharmonic played beautiful music but couldn't act. And then the community players could act but couldn't play. Then the comment, but the sets were good. So I got a yes. So you get different things and different ways, and then I've done portraits, I've done animal portraits, people portraits, kids portraits. And, you know, when you're in the arts, I feel like there's nothing you can't do.
Yeah.
And
You have to be flexible.
and
Have to be.
probably the weakest for me, besides bicycles, is lettering. I'm getting better at it though, but it never was a strong point. I just Malcolm I always marveled because he could.
It's a lost art.
Yeah, my daughter's good at it. I give it to her now.
I would say, you know, the thing that I've learned from just being around these three is that they have an enormous commitment to art, and it's been there from the start, and it's still there. Skip still teaches. Maggie, I can tell any of you young artists, or not even young artists, she will meet you at that gallery if you call her. She told me this the other day, and you know, people used to. I had a teacher at the Art Institute as well, Dan Gustin, and when he was young at Yale, some of him and his friends, they would drive out to try to find George O'Keeffe and just knock on her door, and you could actually knock on her door and go inside and chat with her if she was in the right mood. This lady, I'm telling you, you should. I don't know if they can knock on your door, but you could at least call her and ask her to meet you at the gallery. She has so much to offer you. Really, she has so much to offer. It's extraordinary. I'm not exaggerating. Skip, of course, Skip still teaches, so that's a great resource. I don't think you're teaching But this lady's a cool lady, and if you get to know her, you'll, I'm sure, get lots from her as well. I don't know how much more time we have, but, you know, I think these guys all deserve a round of applause.